Hey, I think we're live. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this Writing Essentials webcast with Maurene Goo, Olugbemisola Rhuday-Perkovich, and Brendan Kiely. We're so excited. Yeah, you guys say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Tim, and I am the program director for NaNoWriMo. And we've been lucky enough to work with We Need Diverse Books, which is a fantastic organization. You should check them out. Their website is at diversebooks.org, and their mission is really to just reflect the stories of everyone, of young people across the United States and across the world in the publishing industry today, which is an incredible mission. You should totally check. They do awesome things all the time. And so go. I said check it out 3 times already, but you should. I am going to introduce these awesome authors who are with us today. So Maurene Goo is the author of Since You Asked, which was her debut novel, I believe. And also is the author of I Believe in a Thing Called Love, which is coming out. Is that coming out this May, Maurene?
Yes, May 30th.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, it's about a high school senior who is really good at everything except romance, which is probably accurate to a lot of teens out there, accurate to me anyways. And so she decides to use the K-dramas that her dad obsessively watches as a blueprint for making her perfect love story.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Yeah. And K-dramas are Korean dramas.
Cool. I was just going to ask you because I totally knew what K-dramas were, and I was talking about it in the office and like about the ones my mom likes to watch, and a couple of our staff members were like, "Wait, K-dramas? What?"
They better start watching them.
They're addictive.
They're so addictive.
And Olugbemisola Rhuday-Perkovich is the author of 8th Grade Super Zero, and most recently, 2 Naomis. And you wrote that with Audrey Vernick, is that right?
Yes, I did.
Awesome. Will you tell us a little bit about that book?
Sure. 2 Naomis is about 2 girls who are not very happy to find that their parents are dating and might be getting a little more serious. Ooh. And they meet for the first time and find out that not only are they the same age, but they also have the same name, Naomi. And their parents want them to really become like best friends. And so they sign them up to take a workshop together and get to know each other better.
Oh man, that sounds so juicy.
There's definitely tween drama, and we're working on the sequel now.
Whoa, that's so cool. That's awesome. There's going to be a sequel.
Yes.
That's
Naomi
great.
Too.
Not Naomi squared?
Thought about that, yeah. But it's 2 Naomis, 2 TOO.
Yeah, nice one.
I like it. And then finally, Brendan Kiely is a New York Times bestselling author whose books include, I think your debut novel was The Gospel of Winter, and then you wrote All American Boys with Jason Reynolds, and your most recent book is called The Last True Love Story.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about that book?
Sure. The Last True Love Story is based on a real life adventure that I took with my own grandfather when he was dying of Alzheimer's disease. And we had this notion that we should try to get him back to the village where he was from in Ireland so he could see it one last time. But while we were there, that plan went awry. And the only story that my grandfather wanted to share was the one about how he fell in love with my grandmother. And I thought, wow, what a powerful story that is. And so The Last True Love Story is an homage to my grandparents falling in love, but it's also about 2 teens who are falling in love for the first time as they try to drive an ailing grandfather across the country so he can go back to the hill where he first kissed his wife.
That's awesome. That sounds great.
Yeah.
The dual love story.
Awesome.
So thanks so much for telling us about your books, and thanks again so much for joining us for this webcast. For everyone who's watching right now, just so you know, we're all getting ready for Camp NaNoWriMo, which if you don't actually know what Camp NaNoWriMo is, it's a virtual writing retreat. You can set your own goals, track your progress, and really it's just designed to help you tackle the next your next great writing project. And so we're getting ready for that. It's happening in April. We're super excited for it. And we thought we would get some incredible authors to come and offer their advice and talk a little bit about the writing essentials. But before we get to that, just to ease everyone in a little bit, we're going to do a real fast lightning round, if that's okay.
I pass.
I pass. Yeah, so you can definitely pass. And then also, don't feel like you have to don't feel pressure to come up with an answer right on the spot, but also don't feel pressure to think too hard about your answer. But Maurene, we're gonna start with you.
Okay, I'm really good at not thinking hard, so.
So Maurene, for NaNoWriMo, we talk a lot about how people tend to assign themselves into two camps, either plotters or pantsers. So plotters are people who are really all about with that rough draft, really outlining and doing a lot of pre-work, and then pantsers are people who like to fly by the seat of their pants a little bit more and just kind of dive into the writing. So if you had to assign yourself to one of those two camps, plotter or pantser?
This is hard because I used to be a die-hard pantser, but this last book that I just finished writing, I plotted for NaNoWriMo.
Whoa.
And it was so helpful. And so I think I'm going to betray the pantser camp and go into plotter now.
Oh my gosh.
It's so much easier, but I still enjoy the pantsing type of writing. I think it's more magical for me, but maybe not the most practical when you're on a deadline.
That's a great answer. Okay, Olugbemisola, we're going to come to you.
Okay.
So coffee as a writer's beverage, overrated, underrated, properly rated?
I will say that I think tea is underrated.
Ooh.
So I'll just say that and not really answer your question.
I like it there.
Diplomatic.
It's very diplomatic for those diehard coffee lovers out there. Okay, awesome. So Brendan, let's say your muse, which I know is already kind of like a fictional creature, but your muse takes comes to being and takes the shape of a mythical creature or cryptid. Name that cryptid.
This is a hard one.
I'm glad you got that one, Brendan.
All right, no, it's got to be. It's a magical creature, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the Irish selkie, that seal that he's in the water and comes out. And I love that movie, The Secret of Rowan Inish.
Yeah.
And I just want I don't know if anyone's seen it out there, but there's that moment where occasionally you see the little boy scurrying down the beach, and he's got no clothes on, and I want that feeling all the time in life. That
That's what you're chasing.
That kind of freedom. So the selkie, let's call it that.
Oh my gosh, that's the best. Okay, Maureen, we're going to come back to you.
Okay.
All right, so I read in one of your bios, I think on your website, that you are a taco aficionado.
Yes.
As a taco aficionado.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I just have strong feelings, but I don't know if I am like that. Okay, wait, go on.
No, strong feelings is exactly what we want here. Uh-huh. Okay, so hard tacos, pro or anti?
Okay, this is where I might be controversial as a taco lover. I have a soft spot for the hard shell tacos with ground beef that my friends ate growing up, my white friends. I still have that soft spot, but I mean, a true taco is a taco from a taco truck, and you don't get hard shell tacos. Come on. So
nice. That's a good answer.
Yeah, but I still love a good hard shell taco. It reminds me of elementary school or something.
I feel like that's those are my complicated feelings about hard tacos as well.
Right? I don't know. Maybe it's like when you grow up as an Asian kid, you don't eat that fun food at home, you know? So I
Yeah.
have a soft spot for like kind of junky American versions of ethnic foods. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So Olugbemisola, I read in one of your bios, I think, somewhere that I think it was an interview actually, where you said you have a secret desire to be a voiceover artist and a puppeteer.
Oh, yes, I did say that.
Okay. So my question to you is a would you rather? Would you rather be a voice in a Pixar movie or be trained as a puppeteer by the Jim Henson Company?
Jim Henson, all the way.
Nice.
Absolutely.
That was like such an easy answer for you.
That was such a good question. Thank you.
Do you have a favorite? Are you like a Muppets fan?
I am. And once I got to spend the day on Sesame Street,
What?
I was
So
working for
cool.
someone who was shooting, we were shooting a segment about the letter O, and that was like awesome.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible. Okay, Brendan. So we talked about road trips. So I read an article that you wrote for a magazine, I think, that was talking about a road trip you took while you were planning to, while you were writing your novel. So best road trip snack.
Oh my God, Cheez-Its. They're the best. I love Cheez-Its.
Jesus, they're nice.
They're terrible for you. They after a while they taste so bad, but they're the best road trip snack. I don't know why I'm addicted to them. And you know, they're better than cigarettes.
That's true.
I love it. Cool. Okay, well, so that was the end of our lightning round. Thank you so much for participating.
I can't believe we end with that.
Yeah.
I really like granola bars and healthy snacks.
I feel like road trip snacks is not where you want to be.
Yeah, healthy.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, cool. All right. So we promised you guys talk about writing essential. We're going to talk about writing essentials. So our first thing that we kind of wanted to talk about was a lot of y'all. So some of you are actually tackling second drafts of your projects, but a lot of you are tackling kind of like rough drafts, first drafts. And so we kind of wanted to talk about like that writing structure. Olugbemisola, do you want to kind of like share a little bit about kind of like how you, what's your process look like when you're starting a new project?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I have a real process. I can never answer that plotter pantser question ever. I guess I'm a planner in the sense that I do spend a lot of time thinking and making notes and jotting down different things from different sources. It might be lines of dialogue that I think of while I'm out for walks. It might be I read something and it has like a kernel of an idea that's part of the theme or premise. And I do a lot of that before I actually write very much of the narrative. So I spend probably too long doing that, but I do spend a lot of time planning and thinking and before I sit down for my dreaded. I have a really hard time with first drafts. I love to revise. It's great when I have something to work with, but I have a very hard time getting to that point where I have something to work with. So my biggest challenge is once I start that first draft to just keep going. I have a bad tendency to go back. What I try to do, and this is my planned process, is write some. Then next time I sit down, read over what I wrote, and then keep going. But what happens a lot is that I read over what I wrote, and then I go back and fix what I wrote, and I go back and fix it again, and I fix it again, and like a shame spiral of fake revision. But so I try to not punish myself. I try to, I know for some people it works to set very specific like page counts or word counts or deadlines. I might sort of say like, I really want to just get through this scene or figure out this one thing. And usually I get past that. So if I change the goals that I set each time. And usually once I meet that, I can move beyond it.
That's awesome. Olugbemisola, when you're like starting, kind of like you described this process where you're kind of like thinking of like pieces of dialogue and like jotting down kind of characters and stuff, like from there, do you like coalesce that into like an outline type deal, or do you usually just kind of use that as a reference doc and then just dive into the writing when you start?
I usually create a reference doc that's a series of questions to myself. There's some questions that I almost always ask, like, where is the heartbreak in this story? Or where is the sweetness in this story? And like when I'm teaching writing, I usually ask my students, like, some variation of, well, what do you mean? Or how do you want the reader to come away feeling after they've read this book? So I ask myself a series of questions. Also, I use, some of the questions are from an article by the author Wendy Mass, who wrote about a process of sort of fake outlining, but not really outlining. And so I use that and I call it my 18 things. And I come up with, it's usually never 18, but a list of things that I think I want to be in this book. So along with those questions and that list, I put together sort of a reference document.
That's awesome. Brendan and Maurene, what? Sorry.
It is awesome.
Brendan and Maurene, what do your kind of like pre-writing processes look like?
Go ahead, Maureen.
Oh, okay. I do a lot of, so it's been different for each book. I guess I've completed my third book. I have a lot of like half-written books, you know, but I think that I like to just start writing. And so for me, I think of characters first, story later. Specifically, like my main character's voice is always like the strongest thing that pulls me towards the story. So I like to start writing in their voice with no structure, kind of like what are they thinking about at this random moment that I'm giving them. That's how all three of my books got started. And then when I hit a point where I'm like, okay, I guess I should write a story or figure out what this book is about, then I take really big, this is boring, I just take big notes, like big picture notes, because I am very big picture. I am not detail oriented as a writer and as a person. So I write things like, I always ask what's, you know, so-and-so's major malfunction, right? And how are they going to change from the beginning of the book to the end? How, you know, like what are the relationships in the books and how are they going to change this person? So that's kind of, because I don't write books about, you know, like big, you know, fantasy books or plot heavy books. I write a lot about people and relationships. So that's kind of what my plots are, based on these evolving relationships. I also like to do, when I am procrastinating and I'm like, this is work because it's related. I like to look up, you know, photos on the internet of like character inspirations, and I make little character doodles of them. I do a lot of like, gosh, I do a lot of this kind of thing.
Ooh, visual aids.
Yeah, I can't believe I have something. I do a lot of like this kind of thing where I write like the character's name and I just write a lot of things about him or her, and kind of just, I try to be organic about it, because if I try to be too structured, it doesn't really feel creative for me, and I feel limited. So I do that kind of stuff. And then I do a lot of my figuring out while I write. That's part of my pantser self. So, oh yes, and I always have coffee. Sorry, I am a coffee person.
I like coffee.
And I also know this is like for the youth, but as an adult, I found that a glass of wine helps me get started as well.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. What about you, Brendan?
I have a couple different processes as well. Depends on the book, I think. Because for my first book, The Gospel of Winter, I took time discovering the characters by just writing them in scenes. And I discovered more about them as I wrote more and more and more. And truthfully, that book took me 6.5 years to write, and it took a long time to write. And I was teaching full time and doing other things, and I actually love that process very much because it feels organic and it feels natural and it feels like the best way to get for me to know a three-dimensional person. Like if I'm meeting a person in real life, I don't know everything about them the day I meet them. I have to take time with them, and I get to know more about them the more time I spend with them. And I feel similarly with my characters, except that I don't feel like I have 6.5 years to write every book anymore. So I don't do that. And instead, I think about something else. And for me, the thing that I do now to help me think about how to write a book is I start by thinking of time. What's the time frame in which the book is going to take place? So when Jason and I sat down to write All American Boys, we made a decision ahead of time that the book was going to take place Friday to Friday, and that gave us a kind of false structure already set up in place. So we knew that each chapter would be one day. We knew that we had all the time we wanted within a day, but the constraint of what we had to achieve in a chapter was day by day. So it put all kinds of constraints and pressures, and I think in all the right ways, because it forced us to move the story along. And the same thing with the Last True Love Story, that when I was writing this book, I knew who the three characters were ahead of time. That because it's based on my own adventure. So I think of the grandfather loosely like my own grandfather, and I think of the teen boy as sort of loosely like me. What I did is I made this huge map on the wall where I had, I thought of a time constraint, like this is going to take place over the course of, they have to get from A to B in 5 days. So each day had a big sticker up at the top. And then I had, so that's like the days are columns and the characters were the start of a row. And I would just think about kind of like what Maurene was saying about about figuring out things about the characters and making notes. I would put those on sticky notes, and I would just stick them on the wall so that I could rearrange and figure out, okay, so if Teddy Hendricks is the boy is having a breakdown, where does that fit? And as I begin to write my scenes, sometimes I'm pulling sticky notes out of one scene and I'm putting it somewhere else. And that for me, it's like, it just gives me a sense of a goal. And I think maybe because I spent my whole life in sports and practice, you'd always need a goal, all right, if I can just push it one more mile or whatever, then I'll listen to my favorite song or whatever. I feel like I need those kinds of carrots and goals when I'm writing. And I often use a wall as my space to set up those kinds of carrots and goals, and it helps me write towards something. But like everyone else is saying, all writing is rewriting. So I write to it, and then I learn, that scene is terrible. All I get out of that is that this is where Teddy and Karina kiss, and I love how they kiss in this moment, but I got to move that to a different scene, and that's oops, spoiler. But but I love that, and I agree also that I really love the rewriting process. It's a pain, and as I'm rewriting, I have tons of just little notes for myself where I'm I sort of section off things, and as I'm rewriting, those are my goals. This is how I'm going to change the scene, and then I just need that handy, like Dumbo's feather, for lack of a better metaphor. Yeah. It's a dumb movie. Nobody needs to watch that anymore. But It's a metaphor I rely on for some dumb reason.
Yes, no. I use that metaphor a lot too.
That's so cool. I really like the kind of the visualization that both you and Maureen talked about. Sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of an echo on my end.
Yeah.
Me too.
I wonder where that's coming from.
I'm not. Does that mean it's me?
I think it's gone now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Great.
it's gone.
Yeah, but I thought I think the visualization thing is really cool because that's not something I haven't necessarily really tried of even doing those kind of character maps that you were showing Maureen and the sticky wall things sound really cool. And I also really thought an interesting commonality between all three of you was kind of when you were talking about starting a story, there was a lot of this kind of almost interrogation aspect of it, where you're asking questions of your story, what's your major malfunction, or what's the sweetness in you, you know? I think that's really cool and a good way to think about kind of especially for a first-time writer maybe who's kind of unsure of how to really make their story come together. That idea, I think Brendan, you were talking about just that process of getting to know somebody and kind of slowly drawing them out. I think that sounds really that totally makes sense to me. Just you're getting to know this idea of a story, drawing them out piece by piece.
Right, and sometimes even in the middle of your writing, that changes. For I believe in a thing called love, I thought I knew my main character really well, and I was like, okay, her major malfunction is she's a perfectionist, which is kind of boring, right? That's very common. And as I kept writing the book, I got more specific, why is she controlling? Why is she a perfectionist? And then when I found that, which by the way happened after I sold my book, at my third round of revisions or something, I was like, oh, wait, actually, and so those moments can happen later too as you're writing it. You don't have to be so rigid and stick to oh no, but her thing is that she's a perfectionist, because you'll find that, oh, you know what, there's a different path or a different core in this character that I've discovered.
And that process of discovery is so much fun, I think. When characters surprise you, or you're oh, this is connected to this. You weren't really thinking of it, but you were thinking of it, sort of. Or I know I'm a very character-driven writer, and sometimes when I'm working with writers who I think are more plot-driven or think more about plot, I still think it's so important to really get to know your character, even if all that's not going in the manuscript. But it just enriches everything about the story when you have such a deep understanding of the character, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. So kind of the other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was, so, there's kind of this myth or this stereotypical view of the writer locked away, in a cabin somewhere at their typewriter, furiously going at it. But the reality is that, a lot of writers have other jobs, or they have families and friends and lives to lead. And so a question that we get a lot from our participants is kind of how do you fit the writing in? How do you make space for the writing in your life?
Well, when I was working on the Gospel of Winter, like I said, I was working full time at a school. I worked at a school for 10 years, and truthfully, the only way that I figured I could I could do it was if I set a goal for myself where I'm very goal oriented. I hear. I didn't realize it.
You are.
This conversation.
You are goals, Brendan.
Yeah.
You are goals.
It's good, I think.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to go figure this out later today. But so I made myself get up at 5 a.m. and I wrote from 5 to 7 because I basically had no other accountability but to myself. And then I would take a shower because I stank because I was sweating. And then I'd go to work and I'd teach the kids. And I think that's really the only. I don't say that to sort of pat myself on the back. What I'm suggesting is that for me, the way that I fit it in is to remind myself that nobody's waiting for that book except me. And so I wanted to, and the way that I work, because I guess I work on punishment and goals, is that is that I had to set up a schedule where I had to be accountable to myself, so I would know that the only person failing in the moment was me, and there wasn't something else. And that's why I set it up for getting up first thing in the morning. Now, that said, I had the advantage of not having other life responsibilities like kids, for example, which would probably make that a lot more difficult. But I know other writers who also have done that, and they have kids, and they a little bit earlier or whatever, and have sorted that out. But for me, that's how I fit it in, is I do it first if I can. And nowadays, if I'm traveling a lot and that's a little bit harder, I still try to, or I just make on Sunday, I make a little to-do list for the week, and I'll say, if I can't do it in the mornings, these 2 days, then I've got to do it in the evening these 2 days. And I just stick to it. And I used to do a lot of freelance work before I was in school. I was a caterer, and I had to bill my hours. So I had a little Excel spreadsheet, and I would track my hours. Like, I'm doing 15 hours this week with this company and 15 hours a week with this company. And I kept the same Excel spreadsheet, and I would just log my hours. Did I get it in?
Wow.
And it helped tremendously, because I could see when I was like, oh, I only did 5 hours this week. I wonder why I haven't finished the scene. So I don't know. I really do sound like I have a bed of spikes next to me right here, and I throw myself on it. No.
Yeah, I'm not very disciplined, so that's kind of a problem when with writing, if you're not contracted, right? Which is pretty much everybody's first book. So my first book came out 4 years ago. So not many YA authors are 4 years between their first and second book, but that's me. But I also took on a job. I do freelance work. I work for an art book publisher, editorial side, and it took over my life for 9 months, and I didn't write a word during those 9 months. So that's part of the reason why my second book is out so late, but also because I kind of think I have a procrastination alarm clock. Like, my body just knows how long it takes for me to finish things. So I kind of knew this book wasn't ready. It didn't feel like the right time. And so I didn't feel bad concentrating on my day job. But now my freelance is about half my day writing, and I have the other half for writing. And I just kind of know when, if I have a deadline, I know how much I need to write every day. And so I used to block off the whole half day, but I wasn't writing, and I was doing all sorts of other things. So now I'm just going to sound nuts, because in a way I'm a full-time author, but I only really write 2 hours a day max, 2 to 3. And it's that is the max output that I can do. I just don't function. I can't actually write beyond that unless I have some deadline, and then it's I am capable of writing till 4 a.m, for 8 straight hours. So I think it's just my inner procrastination alarm clock that helps guide me with keeping me disciplined. It also helps I have friends who are authors, and we meet and we do 30-minute writing sprints together, at a coffee shop. That is really helpful, where we're okay, it's 12:35, we're checking it at 1:05, and then we put on our headphones, and we're not allowed to talk, we're not allowed to pick up our phones. And then at 1:05, we're okay, how many words did you write? And we let it all out for 10 minutes, and then we go back. So that helps too.
That's awesome. Olugbemisola, I think you mentioned earlier that you are a parent. So how do you juggle that with the writing?
I think for me, I've learned to think about almost having sort of different seasons, and just accepting the fact that there'll be certain periods of time where I'll be able to say okay, every morning, I am an early riser, so I may be able to say okay, every morning from 4:30 to 6:30, I'm going to write or work on this book. But then there are other times, I also do a lot of freelance writing and teaching, mostly online now, and writing coaching. So there are times when I have to just tell myself, okay, just accept that for like this period of 2 weeks, you're not going to be able to work on this novel, but you're going to be doing X, Y, Z, and you know that you'll look at I'll look at the calendar and say, okay, on this date, once I've gotten this done, I'll go back to it. Or there'll be other times where I'll say like, okay, every day this week, I know from this time to this time, usually in the morning, I'm definitely better writing in the mornings. I try to do like my writing in the mornings and my sort of freelancey other people's writing later in the day when I'm not as fresh.
I do the opposite.
Sounds really bad.
I do the
I
opposite.
save my
'cause
best me for my work. Yeah. But yeah, and also, you know, my daughter is involved in a lot of activities. So I'm doing a lot of schlepping and going around. I've spent a lot of time on the subway. So also those times I've learned to also accept that, okay, if I have this little 20-minute, 30-minute pocket of time, I can use it to do that, like take some notes or write a couple of pages on this chapter or think about this character, ask myself some questions more. So I've definitely learned to sort of do a combination of both plan and schedule, but understand that it has to be super, super flexible and forgive myself for that.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think sometimes if you are limited with your time too, you are way more productive in that small amount of time you have. That's part of my problem when I had so many more hours in the day to write. I was just like kind of paralyzed by that.
Yeah.
So when now I tell myself, okay, I've learned that I can write for 2-3 hours, and I know I have that window, like, and it's usually between like 3 to 6 or something. I'm way more productive that way.
And I'm like you, Maureen, deadlines are definitely a motivator. And,
Right?
And the working with a co-author, like on Two Naomis, because we just alternate chapters. So for that, we both went much faster than we work on our own books because it was like, okay, I have to get her this chapter. So I got to hurry up and just get it done. Like not worry about it, not spend like 87 days thinking about whether she has like yellow shoes or what would that mean. Like just do it and get it going.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I agree. I feel similarly. The collaboration process was an incentive to move more quickly than I was accustomed to before, partially because my writing partner is like the fastest writer I've ever met in my life, but also because it was that level of like accountability that I felt like to Jason. If he's got a chapter done, I've got to finish a chapter, and that sort of process was exciting. And I feel like people could do that even if they're not working on a book together. I think you could set sort of mutual goals together. So another little trick and incentive that I employed at one point was there was another person named Brendan, who's a friend of mine, who's also a writer, and we just had a Google alert on Fridays, like 2,000 words due to Brendan. And we would send each other an email with 2,000 words, let's say, that hopefully we finish that week. And neither one of us had to actually read each other's work. We just had to make sure that we sent an email. Otherwise, the other person could write an email and say, "Hey, what's the matter? What's the matter? Hey man, what's going on?" So there's that really, again, masochistic incentive as well. But I do like it quite a bit, and I love having that little note. And even though he and I have stopped swapping, I still have that note on my Friday Google alerts, which I really appreciate. It feels like I'm accountable to him somewhere.
Yeah, accountability is really helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's actually like a great, like, everything that the three of you just said in your last like kind of responses was like such a good segue into our next little topic, which was just this idea of like the writing community and like what that brings to your writing process. And so I know Olugbemisola and Brendan, you both co-wrote books. And Maurene, you just talked a little bit about this writers group that you do the sprints with. What I think you've talked about just like the benefits of the accountability aspect, but I guess like I guess the first question really is like, how did you find your writing community?
Oh, that's a good question. It took me a while actually because I wasn't when I got published with my first book, which is a YA. I didn't know much about the YA world. I like to read a lot of teen-focused books my whole life, and I knew that was my voice, and that's what I wanted to write. So, and I never went through the querying process. I didn't join any online groups before I published. I basically kind of, I don't want to say I fell into publishing, but I kind of did, which is not to say I didn't work hard, but it was just, I had opportunities and stuff that I think I was very lucky to have. So I discovered that there's this whole online world of YA authors, and like, man, people query for years, and they all know all the agents and all the editors and what this means, and they had all this vocabulary that I was like, oh my God, I feel so like a baby. So it took me a few years to kind of, I found an online debut group, which is awesome. So I debuted 2013, so they were the lucky 13s, and it's just all these authors, you know, from all over the US and some from all over the world. And then through that, I met a couple of authors locally in LA who are now still like my really good author friends. And then once you kind of like make those first few connections, like everyone's really great about, I mean, not everyone, but my friends were really great about kind of like connecting you to other people. And then you start going to book festivals and panels. And I know a lot of writers are introverted, which I think is helpful for when you have to be caved and, you know, like sitting in a cave and writing for days, but I am not. I am very extroverted and I need a lot of people time. So I go out of my way to make friends with people and to force them to have coffee writing dates with me. I'm not shy about that. I'll say, you're going to be my friend and we're going to go write together. And so I've got these in real life, and I live in LA, so we have a huge YA community here. And I meet up with my friends and I write here. There's always someone that's like willing to write. And then I also have like another online group of writer friends, and we do like a, you know, like a Slack. I don't know if you've heard of Slack, but it's kind of like a Google Hangouts like type chatting thing, and we can pop in and out of there, and we have an accountability channel. So if I have no friends in real life and I'm working at home, I pop in there and I'm like, who wants to write? I'm going to be writing for the next 2 hours. And there's inevitably one or two other people that are like me. And we're like, okay, cool. Then we do the sprints, or we check in an hour and we share snippets of each other's work. That was amazing. That helped me finish this last draft. Like I wouldn't have done it that quickly without, you know, because I know they're going to read it. And so I'm trying to write a little better than I would too if I was drafting alone. So yeah, I would say the internet is huge. Meeting people in real life, connecting to your community, like within your area. And, you know, maybe it's harder in different cities, but in LA it was pretty easy. And I don't know, just being open and friendly and trying to connect to people really helped for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think what you're saying about kind of like the accountability partners and like just like having this like internet community, that's actually, so like for people who are watching this, like if that's something that like you're really looking for, I think that's one of the things that's like, there are like so many different like people. I think Twitter's really valuable for something like that.
Yeah.
There are so many different people, and like even if you follow kind of like some of your favorite YA authors or other authors, a lot of times they're really plugged into these communities, and just getting a sense of like, see, like I know there are some YA authors even who like kind of run public Twitter word sprints. So you could check that out. And then of course, NaNoWriMo, we run word sprints on Twitter. We have an account just for that called @NaNoWordSprints. So if this is something that you're watching and like you're really like looking for, like you should check that out for sure. And Olugbemisola and Brendan, you guys both co-wrote. I was going to ask if you would ever co-write again, but Olugbemisola, it sounds like you're working on that next one.
Yes. I mean, it helps because I know Audrey very well. We have the same agent. We met our agent at the same. We all met at the same time, and so we know each other very well. Before we even joked about writing a book together, we would critique each other's work, and so we also know each other's writing voice as well, and we trust each other. I trust Audrey. And I think that's important. With To Naomi's, it really did, it was sort of a joke that we had between the two of us, and we didn't really do very much with it. And then our agent happened to be talking with an editor about both of us and mentioned this book idea that we didn't really have. And the editor was interested. And so we were like, well, let's actually come up with a real story. And for me, that process has been fun because we work so quickly, and it's just like, okay, let's just go to the next chapter. And because we're both sort of not, in some ways we're similar in that we don't like outline meticulously before we write, and we both are very character driven. So we just kind of have one or two very big picture conversations about the story, and then we just start and we kind of figure it out as we're going, and we may go back later and say, oh, this is an important thing we should put in the story. So, but I also feel like I have freedom to just go with what I think is right for my part of the story, and she has the freedom to go in and say like, hey, like my character wouldn't do that, or this doesn't really work, and I feel like I can do the same thing, like say like, hey, she would never say that, or I never thought of her saying that. And that's like a nice part. Like I get ideas or I get surprises that work really well from what she does, and I hope it happens in the opposite way.
That's awesome. Yeah, were there things that I guess, Brendan, if you were going to do the co-writing thing again, like were there things that like you learned from the process of like, oh, this worked really well, or like, oh, like I might want to try this a little differently if I did it again?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there was something kind of unique about the particular co-writing experience that Jason and I had for All American Boys, because we spent a lot of time becoming friends first. And I think that the kind of book that we wrote, that's a book about police brutality and racism in America, it required the two of us to do a lot of work to build trust between us first, because as a black man and a white man writing together about race and racism, there are, I think, there's a lot to take care to say and to think about very thoughtfully. And in particular, as a white person entering into a conversation about race and racism, I think it's really important that I take a back seat and listen much more than talk and force any kind of agenda. So I think it's really, that collaborative experience was one that was kind of forged in a special kind of friendship that was emerging between us. And if I were to do a collaboration project again, I mean, I think I would be excited to do a collaboration project again from a sort of working standpoint, because I think it's cool. I think it's really a pretty cool experience to be putting heads together to come up with concepts and stuff. When I was younger, there were a group of us together, 9 of us, who kind of co-wrote a science fiction play, and it was really fun because theater is always so collaborative. And what we did was kind of we each kind of created our characters and almost kind of improv them out with each other, and there was something lively about that was aesthetically interesting. And I would likewise do something with a book. If I were going to collaborate with somebody, that would be exciting, but it would never replace the power of having taken the time to really get to know somebody first. And so really truthfully, I don't know if that can be recreated, and I just feel grateful for that experience. Not to derail, the project here that we're talking about, but that maybe is also part of what the writing process is about, and maybe a thing to talk about, that just because you want to write about something doesn't mean necessarily it's the best project for you to work on, and I think that's a real truism. I think that there is real value in the process. By investing yourself in getting to know whatever it is you want to write about, that you have some personal connection to it, not just it's an idea, or not just I want to do this because I read other things like that out there, but to invest personally, to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to be humble as you step into the subject that you're going to write about, I think are all really important things, sort of self-work to do before engaging in any writing project, because this goes back to the very first point that I think everyone was making about characters. You want to be true as possible to what those characters' experiences would be like, and the only way to do that, I think, is to take the time to get to know, as Williams Garcia once said, to get to know the air they breathe, and I think that's really important. So if I were going to collaborate with somebody, I would definitely want to make sure that I had taken the time to get to know the air they breathe.
I always ask writers that come to me with a manuscript or an idea, why are you the one to tell this story? Like, why do you think you should be the person to tell this story? And it's always interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean, there's a wide range of answers to that question. But I think it is an important question to ask yourself when you're embarking on any project, either solo or collaborative. Why you?
Yeah. Awesome. That's actually, you guys are like nailing it with the segues this whole like through this whole thing. Because that's actually going to be our last topic. So we're going to talk about this, just so for everyone watching, we're going to talk about this last topic real quick, and then we're going to try to take a handful, or maybe 2 or 3 questions at the end, and then we'll kind of wrap up and close out. Thank you so much for watching and for joining. I hope you're getting a lot out of this. I'm getting so much out of it. So yeah, I mean, I think this last thing was just that, we've just like from our community and with like the people that we write with, it's a lot of people who kind of have this like passion for writing, but I think especially in the light of, like kind of like in the climate of the United States right now. I know we have a lot of participants who are writing in other countries as well. But talking about the United States specifically, like it's a weird political climate. It's a weird time. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of division and kind of like scary stuff. So I think something that we've heard from our participants a lot is kind of like this, almost like this new soul searching of like, like why am I writing? Like, what is important about writing for me right now? And like I think kind of like you were saying, Olugbemisola, this question of like, why am I like, with whatever story you have in mind, why am I the person to write this story? So I just was wondering, just like if you guys could talk a little bit about what you're finding like really meaningful and challenging about writing, and just like that identity of being a writer right now.
Yeah, I think about something my friend who is also a writer said to me in the very beginning of my writing career, I guess, when I was writing my first book. We were hanging out together and something happened, in the world that like upset me. And I was just saying, you just feel really helpless, like in the face of these big things happening in the world. And she was like, well, it's so awesome that you're a writer, because you can kind of put in your, I don't like to use the word values because it sounds very like preachy, but your opinion of the world, the things you value, the things that you are important, your vision of like humanity is reflected in your books, right? That's like the small way that you contribute, that you put in like a piece of yourself into the world, and hopefully it, there's a ripple effect with all the people who read it. And not like my books are, they're not like overtly political or even that profound. I don't say that to talk down my books. I think that I write like really fun and authentic type stuff. But I do think that even in those kind of books that, this is a rom-com. This is about a funny 15-year-old complaining about her parents a lot. There's still, I put my stories in there, my ideas of what it is to be kind of a good person, or how to live your life in ways, and the kind of world I envision too. My books take place in very diverse cities with diverse schools. So much that one time somebody read my book and was like, this feels like forced, like it's so diverse, it doesn't exist. And I'm like, excuse me, one, that was my high school, that's where I grew up, but two, like If it feels foreign to you, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And wouldn't it be nice also?
Yeah.
So I stick to that. I think about that all the time. And it really hit me, after the election. I felt very bereft. Like, what am I doing? I'm writing about these fun girls in a food truck in the summer. That's my third book. It's a secret, by the way. And I'm writing about friendship, and I realized, oh my gosh, I'm writing about female friendship, and I want to empower these girls. I want them to, without them being like marching in a protest or anything, I want their lives to reflect this idea of girls being strong and coming together. The little things I realized my book started to change. It took a little bit of more of a feminist stance. And it also is a love letter to LA, which is my city, which I'm so proud of right now, and California in general, So that's kind of how I'm doing it without having to discuss things overtly in my books, which I think is great for people who are doing that. It just would feel weird in the kind of books I write. But I find that you can still do it in anything that you create, I think.
Awesome.
For me, I think I'm writing because I'm always asking questions. And so it's sort of about exploring those questions, sometimes figuring out my own answers, sometimes just to explore the questions and think about them or just work out ideas. I think since the election, I think a lot about sort of systematic attempts to dehumanize Black and brown children. And so in my writing, I really hope to sort of claim the complexity of their lives, the joy, the pain, the beauty of just of our kids and their stories and all of the kids that I meet and know, and just to sort of offer a gift back to them, and sort of help remind all of us of all the gifts that they have that they offer to us.
Yeah. I think I really feel like I like Maurene is saying like not to be too prescriptive, right? And I think Bemi, you're sort of saying that too. It's like coming out of a space of celebration in the face of so much disgusting, dehumanizing, systematic oppression. I worry. This is coming from somebody who writes politically with unabashed kind of abandon. And I think that not everyone has to do that. And I agree that I think we can do it in ways where we honor the characters. I really think it goes back to that. I think we have to think about why we're writing these stories. Yes, it's a more political time in America, but it doesn't mean that that all the people that we write about are different. It's the same people. Maybe our approach at how we get to know them more is a little different, but we're still writing about people, and it's this is the same America that it was 10 years ago. That's the reality that maybe not all of us wanted to recognize. Yeah. But but this notion maybe about how we go about writing, this is something that I think about often, because I often think about writing about exposing the privilege or the ignorance that so many of us have lived with for so long, and doing that in a humane way, so that again it's sort of thinking about how to be more humble. But as I've traveled around the country since the election, and people have asked questions about writing politically, or what kind of stuff should you or should you not write, I think I especially after this election, I think I want us all to think about how we can become better human beings first, and let that path lead us into what we write. Because I at least will speak for myself. I can be a better human being, and I'd like to focus on that and let that become part of my way of thinking about how I write about other people.
I think, and writing helps us do that. I love writing just because it sort of helps us figure that out ourselves, and
Yeah.
that transactional nature of reading too, like then sharing your work with a reader and then their feelings about our responses to it, and just that relationship with our work, with our readers, with ourselves. It
Yeah,
just offers opportunities.
I think about the reader-writer relationship. It's all about empathy too. Like, I mean, and we need diverse books. Like, one of the big reasons why I'm a part of it and I support it is I think it just fosters empathy, you know,
Yeah.
and, you know, the more different experiences you read about, the more empathetic you are. Or I would hope that's what comes out of it. And you need that when you write as well.
Yeah.
You have to, with your characters and then the world you're talking about.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think Olugbemisola, you were talking about like when in your co-writing process with Audrey that she would sometimes like write something about a character and you'd be like surprised. You'd be like, oh, like that's not necessarily how I would have viewed that, or like I don't know that I would have put those words in that character's mouth. And it almost kind of ties back to like this process, like Maurene was saying, just this empathy building kind of, or just like even just exploring the world around us a little bit and kind of expanding that even just like our viewpoints as writers, you know, like in that relationship, I think is really interesting.
And it's not always comfortable, but discomfort is opportunity for growth. So I think it's important.
Totally.
Absolutely.
I wish we could talk so much longer, but like we're already over as it is. Would you mind maybe just taking like one or two questions? Is that okay?
That's fine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Cool. Sorry, I will try to keep it. I'll try to keep it short. So we had a question from. Let me make sure I get it right. So from a participant named Cassie L. She wanted to know, how do you find the beginning of your book or story? Every time I think I've got my first chapter, I realize I should probably set the stage better.
I think for me, nothing's been rewritten more than the first chapter of my books. I try not to stress myself out about it and just start, and then you will, in your revisions, maybe find a better way. Someone told me about when you write scripts, when you're writing a movie, you should start at the latest possible point that, you know, in the story. Because I think people's tendency is to do all this like backstory and build up, but it's actually more interesting when you start like at the latest possible point of this person's journey. I don't agree with that being the best way always, but it's helped me kind of find an interesting point to start.
That's great.
I feel like I do a lot of, I start writing and I get to know the characters and then I later cut those chapters. Because I agree with Maureen, I feel like the beginnings of my books are the parts that have been the most rewritten out of anything, because it's a process. I don't write the book. I really don't write the book chapter 1 to chapter whatever, and that's it. It's you're writing the book. You're writing the book. You're rewriting. So I would just begin, and then worry about the editing later.
Yeah.
I concur.
So we actually, you all talked about this a little bit already, but we have a question from a participant named Jenna, who's saying, it's always terribly hard for me to create an outline, but I try to use one when possible. How do I exactly create an outline, and how detailed should it be? I feel like there was like kind of like a consensus that like it doesn't necessarily have to be so structured, right? Like it can be a little bit more free form.
It's definitely free form for me because it's not an outliner, but I do create, I guess, what is a reference document that is sort of a series of questions and lists and doodles and sketches that I can refer back to, but I don't worry about outlining at all, because I think I would just get stuck in trying to plan everything perfectly and never actually write the book or the story.
Yeah, when I try to keep it to like a classic structured outline, you know, like the Roman numerals and then the letters and then the I got so caught up in the formatting on Microsoft Word. I was getting so angry. And so I eventually found that my outlining is writing like scenes in short paragraph forms, just quick descriptions without caring about my writing, kind of like when you write a synopsis for a book. So then it just became like a 5-page document, single spaced with like short paragraphs. And then each of those paragraphs eventually became like either a scene or a whole chapter. And it's kind of like a living thing. That was like, for me, when I try to do the outline, oh my God, it was like an extra step.
I'm like Maureen. It's similar. Like I have like little, like I'm looking at my notes right here for this other thing. Flashback to football game. That's the whole way I describe, like summarize that scene.
Yeah.
Or classroom scene where, you know, some boys are dismissive of the girls' answers in class. Boom. Like that's all I'm sort of talking about that, and then and I'll go back and write it later, and I move it around on my crazy wall.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so one last question. This is from Isabella in the chat, and they wanted to know, so like, I think, Olugbemisola, you described this a little bit, but how do you get out of that editing loop where you just find yourself kind of like going back and like editing certain scenes over and over and you just can't move forward? Like, how do you break free from that?
I think that's just a matter of making that decision and accepting that. I think now, especially when I'm doing readings of work that's already been published and I'm still revising it, like as I read aloud and still making changes. So accepting that, like, it's never going to be that whatever this perfect thing I think it's going to be in my head, and I'm kind of wasting time. And if I really want to tell this story, let me just tell the story, like keep moving forward, and just and thinking of it maybe in small bites. Sometimes that helps, so that I think, okay, if I do like another 2 pages, I'll treat myself and then go back and I can like play around with this. But I just make the decision like, okay, I know this is bad. But would I rather move on and have more bad stuff to work with, or just have like these 3 pages for 4 years, which I did once, and just have that to play around with, and that never even actually ended up in the book. So it's a combination for me of making the decision to just move on, to be forgiving of the writing, and to understand that it's a process and that this whole perfection thing is like impossible.
Totally.
NaNoWriMo actually helped me a lot with that because of the goals for NaNoWriMo. So I remember I tweeted like, oh my God, I'm going to do it for the first time or something. And Rainbow Rel, I think, tweeted back, and she was like, just keep looking forward. Don't look back. Because that's the thing. I do that too. I'm like, oh, how I'm going to settle in is to reread the last 17 chapters I wrote, which is, you know. So I decided, okay, don't ever read. Don't read what I wrote. Just keep going forward. And that's easier said than done. But I was able to do it this time around. And that is like the fastest way that like the fastest I've ever drafted in my life. It also helps that I'm impatient and kind of lazy. So I always hit a point where I'm like, I know this could be better, but I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I agree. It's just, I love the idea of pushing forward. I love the idea of going back and editing later. I also always want to recognize that at the end of the day, it's always going to be some kind of collaboration, because if you're fortunate enough to get the piece published, it's likely that you're going to work with an editor. And so the most important thing, I think, is to tinker to a point, but then to just say, I've got to take the risk to show it to the world and see what the world has to say. And that risk is okay, because you do it once and you see what happens, and hopefully you'll keep doing it. Yeah. It's nerve-wracking every time. When I sent the manuscript of The Last True Love Story to my editor, I was just terrified. And I had already turned in 2 books before that.
That's where I am right now. My editor's reading my first draft. I try not to think about it.
We're sending virtual hugs.
Yeah. Oh, you guys.
Well, this was amazing. Thank you so much, Maurene, Brendan, Olugbemisola, for spending this time with us and for spending an extra 10 minutes with us. Really, really appreciate that. I feel like, for everyone who's watching, just thank you. I mean, thanks to you for spending this hour and 10 minutes with us as well. And I think, for me, like just almost as like a viewer, like I thought like one of the like most interesting things was just like it kind of felt like there was almost like a theme throughout where like we talked a lot about kind of like these ways of like asking questions of our story and of ourselves and of our fellow writers. And I really love kind of like that view of writing as this process of continuing to kind of like question the world around us and bringing kind of these doubts and like these like just this curiosity to the table to be able to tell these stories. And so for everyone who's watching, like I hope you feel as inspired as I do right now, just to like continue to kind of like engage with your writing projects and ask questions of it and challenge yourself and push yourself a little deeper. And to also, like do those kind of like structural things of just like, if you have to, like giving yourself a timeline on the wall or like, jotting down notes as you're kind of like walking your dog or whatever that happens, just to really kind of like enable your writing. So yes, thank you again, Brendan, Maurene, and Olugbemisola for spending this time with us.
Thank
y'all
you.
are awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
We're going to put links for the authors down in the description for the video below. We'll put a link to Diverse Books down there. And then, of course, we'll put a link to Camp NaNoWriMo down there if you want to check that out, if you haven't already decided to sign up. So thank you again so much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.